She had exactly $4 to her name, shivering in a rusted Honda Civic with her hungry 7-year-old son when the phone rang. It was an inheritance from a grandmother everyone swore died penniless. But what she found hidden inside that rotting mountain cabin would rewrite her family's history and put a dangerous target on her back. The frost on the inside of the windshield was thick enough to scrape off with a fingernail. Clara Jenkins pulled the thin, moth-eaten sleeping bag higher over her son Sam, who was curled in the back seat of their 2008 Honda Civic. They had been living in the Walmart parking lot on the outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina, for 3 weeks. Clara was 29, but the deep purple bags under her eyes and the hollows of her cheeks made her look a decade older. A brutal string of bad luck, a factory layoff, a predatory landlord, and a medical emergency had wiped out her meager savings, leaving her and Sam on the streets. Her greatest, most paralyzing fear was that Child Protective Services would find them. She spent her nights wide awake, watching the parking lot security lights, terrified of a tap on the glass. When her prepaid burner phone vibrated against the plastic dashboard at 7 a.m., Clara nearly jumped out of her skin. Clara Jenkins, the voice on the other end, asked. It was a man, his tone dry and professional. My name is Gregory Abernathy. I'm an attorney based in Boone. I'm calling regarding the estate of your late grandmother, Beatrice Caldwell. Clara blinked her breath, pluming in the freezing car. She hadn't seen Grandma Beatrice in 15 years. Beatrice was a recluse who lived up near Rowan Mountain, widely known in the family as a fiercely stubborn, eccentric woman who lived off the grid and practically in squalor. When Beatrice passed away 2 months ago, Clara couldn't even afford the gas to attend the funeral. Estate. Clara croaked her throat dry. Mr. Abernathy, with all due respect, my grandmother didn't have an estate. She washed her clothes in a creek. Be that as it may, Miss Jenkins, she left a will, and you are the sole beneficiary. I suggest you come to my office. 2 hours later, after using her last $4 for gas, Clara sat in a plush leather chair in Gregory Abernathy's mahogany-paneled office. She felt acutely aware of her wrinkled clothes and the fact that Sam was ravenously eating the complimentary biscotti off the lawyer's coffee table. Mr. Abernathy slid a manila folder across the desk. Your grandmother owned a 30-acre plot of land and a cabin on the north side of Roan Mountain. It is entirely paid off. No mortgage. The property taxes are current. By the stipulations of her will, she has left the deed exclusively to you. Clara's hands shook as she picked up the heavy embossed paper. A house, a piece of land. It wasn't a mansion, it was a shack in the woods. But to a homeless mother, it was the Taj Mahal. It was a roof. It was safety. There is one caveat, Abernathy said, leaning forward, his expression tightening. Since the filing of the probate, I have received numerous calls from a man named Mitchell Caldwell. Your second cousin, I believe. Clara frowned. Mitchell was a local real estate flipper, a slick-talking man who had always looked down on Clara's side of the family. Yes. We don't speak. He is intensely interested in purchasing the property from you. He offered $30,000 cash. If you need the money, Miss Jenkins, it might be a way out. $30,000. The number echoed in Clara's mind. It could get them an apartment, a decent used car, new clothes for Sam. But something didn't sit right with her. Mitchell was notoriously cheap. If he was offering $30,000, the land was either worth double that, or he knew something she didn't. More importantly, selling meant giving up the only permanent home she had ever owned. No, Clara said, her voice finding a sudden strength. We're moving in. The drive up Roan Mountain was treacherous. The Honda's engine whined in protest as they navigated the steep, winding dirt roads that barely qualified as a driveway. When they finally broke through the dense canopy of Appalachian pines, Clara killed the engine and stared. The cabin was a disaster. The roof sagged like a broken spine, moss growing thick over the rotting cedar shingles. The front porch leaned dangerously to the left, and the windows were grimy, opaque with years of dirt. The yard was a graveyard of rusted farm equipment and knee-high weeds. "Are we going to live here?" Mummy Sam asked, his small hand gripping hers tightly. "We're going to make it an adventure." Buddy Clara lied, masking her overwhelming dread with a forced smile. Before they could even carry their 2 trash bags of clothes to the front door, the crunch of heavy tires on gravel broke the mountain silence. A massive, brand-new black Ford F-150 pulled into the clearing. Out stepped Mitchell Caldwell. He wore a tailored canvas jacket and an expensive smartwatch, looking entirely out of place in the overgrown wilderness. Clara Mitchell called out, flashing a perfectly white, predatory smile. "Abernathy told me you were coming up here. Look at you, and this must be little Sam." Clara instinctively pulled Sam behind her leg. "What do you want, Mitchell?" Mitchell sighed, looking at the dilapidated cabin with theatrical disgust. "I'm trying to save you from a nightmare, Clara. Look at this place. It's a tear down. The foundation is cracked, there's no city water, and the electrical wiring is a fire hazard. You don't have the money to fix this. It's none of your business what I have." Mitchell took a step closer, dropping the friendly act. His eyes were cold, scanning the perimeter of the cabin with an intense, calculating hunger. "I'll give you 40,000. Cash. Today. You sign the deed over to me, and you can drive back down that mountain and start a new life. Don't be stupid, Clara. People freeze to death up here." Clara watched his hands. He was nervously twisting the heavy gold ring on his right hand. He was desperate. "Why get off my property?" "Mitchell," Clara said, her voice eerily calm. Mitchell's face flushed red. For a second, Clara thought he might hit her. Instead, he let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "You're just like that crazy old bat Beatrice, stubborn and stupid. You'll be begging me to buy it before the first snow." He climbed back into his truck, slamming the door, and sped off, kicking up a cloud of choking grey dust. Clara turned back to the rotting cabin. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. Mitchell wasn't trying to help her. He was trying to steal something, and she was going to find out what it was. Their first 3 days in the cabin were a grueling test of endurance. There was no electricity, just as Mitchell had warned. The well pump was manual, requiring Clara to spend 20 minutes hauling up enough rusty, metallic-smelling water just to boil for mac and cheese on the antique cast-iron wood stove. Yet despite the grime and the cold drafts whistling through the floorboards, it was theirs. They slept on an old mattress Clara found, wrapped in heavy plastic, in the loft, cocooned in blankets. During the day, while Sam played in the front yard with his toy trucks, Clara scrubbed. She tore down cobwebs, scrubbed the linoleum floors with vinegar, and began throwing out decades of Beatrice's accumulated junk. But the more Clara cleaned, the more she realized how strange her grandmother's house truly was. Beatrice Caldwell had lived in absolute poverty. Her wardrobe consisted of mended threadbare dresses. Her pantry was lined with generic dented cans of soup. Yet the physical security of the cabin was bafflingly disproportionate to its contents. The doors. The front and back doors were made of solid, reinforced steel, painted to look like wood. The locks. Each door had 3 high-grade commercial deadbolts. The windows. Behind the sheer yellowed lace curtains, every single ground-floor window was reinforced with wrought-iron bars drilled directly into the stone foundation. Who was a frail 80-year-old woman trying to keep out? Or Clara wondered with a chill, what was she trying to protect? The answer began to reveal itself on their 4th night, courtesy of a massive Appalachian thunderstorm. It started at dusk. The wind howled through the pines, sounding like a freight train roaring past the windows. Then came the rain coming down in heavy, violent sheets. Inside, the cabin's compromised roof immediately gave way. Clara ran frantically around the living room and kitchen in the dim light of a kerosene lantern, placing buckets, pots, and Tupperware under a dozen different leaks. The rhythmic ping, ping, ping of water hitting metal echoed through the dark house. "Mummy, it's loud," Sam cried from the loft, covering his ears. "It's just a little rain, Sammy, stay in bed," Clara yelled back over a deafening crack of thunder. She rushed into the small walk-in pantry at the back of the kitchen to grab another pot. As she stepped inside, she felt her boot sink into the linoleum. The floor was completely flooded. Water wasn't just dripping from the ceiling, it was cascading down the back wall of the pantry, pooling behind the cheap, waterlogged drywall. Before Clara could back out, a massive gust of wind struck the side of the cabin. The cabin shuddered violently. With a sickening skuk, the weakened, rotting drywall at the back of the pantry buckled under the weight of the trapped water. Clara leaped back as a 5-foot section of the wall simply gave way, collapsing into a heap of wet plaster, splintered wood, and black mold. Clara stood coughing in the dust, her lantern held high. Where the wall had been, there was no exterior siding or insulation. Instead, the collapsed drywall had revealed a hollowed-out cavity, carved directly into the thick stone of the mountain against which the back of the cabin was built. Clara's breath hitched. She stepped over the wet debris, holding the lantern closer. Inside the dark, recessed alcove sat 2 items, a heavily tarnished cast-iron lockbox the size of a microwave, and a thick bundle wrapped in oiled leather and tied with twine. Her heart racing, Clara carefully pulled the leather bundle out first. It was surprisingly heavy. She carried it to the kitchen table, wiping the grime from her hands onto her jeans. With trembling fingers, she untied the twine and folded back the stiff leather. Inside was a stack of yellowed brittle papers and a black and white photograph. Clara held the photograph to the lantern light. It showed her grandmother Beatrice looking wildly different. She was young, perhaps 25, wearing a stunning silk dress dripping in pearls. She was smiling, holding on to the arm of a handsome, sharp-jawed man wearing a tailored 3-piece suit. Clara flipped the photo over. In faded blue ink it read, "Beatrice and Arthur, Tommy. Caldwell. Chicago, 1934. Clara stared in disbelief. Her family had always sworn that her grandfather Tommy was a poor coal miner who died in a cave-in before Clara's mother was even born. But the man in this photo looked like a Wall Street banker or a mobster. She turned her attention to the papers. They were blueprints. But they weren't for a house. They were incredibly detailed hand-drawn schematics of a subterranean tunnel system. At the bottom of the page, a large, bold text read, "The Caldwell Vein. Excavation Plan." A vein, Clara thought. A gold vein. She rushed back into the pantry and gripped the handle of the cast-iron box. She hauled it out her muscles, straining against the immense weight, and slammed it onto the kitchen table. It was sealed with a heavy brass padlock. Clara didn't hesitate. She grabbed the heavy cast-iron fire poker from the living room stove. Raising it high above her head, she brought it down on the padlock with all her strength. Clang! The brass dented. She hit it again. Clang! On the 4th strike, the ancient locking mechanism shattered. Clara pulled the heavy lid open. She gasped, stumbling backward and knocking her chair to the floor. The box wasn't filled with old mining tools or family heirlooms. It was packed to the brim. On the left side sat 4 solid gleaming bars of raw bullion, heavy dull yellow gold, entirely unmarked. But it was the right side of the box that made Clara's blood run cold. Stacked neatly bound in crumbling paper bands were hundreds of crisp, perfectly preserved bills. But they weren't normal currency. They were vintage 1934 $1,000 bills bearing the face of Grover Cleveland. Clara reached out her fingers, brushing the impossible fortune. She was a homeless mother who an hour ago had been worrying about the cost of a can of beans. Now she was staring at what had to be millions of dollars. Suddenly, over the roaring crash of the rain outside, another sound cut through the cabin. Bam! 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 Someone was violently pounding on the reinforced steel front door. Clara froze. The lantern flickered, casting long, monstrous shadows across the gold in the box. Clara opened the door. A voice screamed from the porch, muffled by the howling wind. It was Mitchell, and he didn't sound like a man making a real estate offer anymore. He sounded like a man who had come for what was his. The relentless pounding against the reinforced steel door vibrated through the floorboards. Clara scrambled backward, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She immediately reached over and blew out the kerosene lantern, plunging the kitchen into suffocating darkness. "Clara, I know you're in there." Mitchell's voice was completely unhinged, warped by the roaring wind and the pouring rain. "You don't even know what you're sitting on. It belongs to my side of the family." "Open the damn door." Clara felt her way through the dark, her hands slick with cold sweat. She grabbed the heavy canvas backpack she used for their laundry and desperately began shoving the thick stacks of $1,934,000 bills and the 4 heavy gold bars inside. Mummy Sam's terrified, trembling voice came from the loft. "Quiet, baby." "Stay low," Clara whispered fiercely, zipping the heavy bag shut and slinging it over her shoulder. The weight of the bullion nearly pulled her down. Outside, the pounding abruptly stopped. For 5 agonizing seconds, there was nothing but the sound of the torrential rain beating against the sagging roof. Then, Clara heard the heavy crunch of boots stomping through the mud toward the side of the house. Mitchell wasn't leaving. He was looking for a weakness. "You think Beatrice was just a crazy old hoarder?" Mitchell yelled his face, suddenly appearing in the flash of lightning outside the kitchen window. He was gripping a massive steel crowbar. Tommy Caldwell didn't die in a coal mine. "Clara. He robbed the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago in 1934. Beatrice hid the money for 80 years. And I am not letting a homeless high school dropout take my cut. Smash!" Mitchell swung the crowbar directly into the glass of the kitchen window. Shards exploded inward, scattering across the linoleum. But the wrought iron bars Beatrice had drilled into the foundation held firm. Mitchell snarled, hooking the crowbar behind the iron and pulling with all his weight. The old stone groaned, but the bars didn't budge. "You want to play it the hard way?" Fine Mitchell shouted, disappearing from the window. A moment later, the deafening roar of his Ford F-150 engine fired up. Headlights illuminated the driving rain, cutting stark, violent shadows through the shattered window. He was backing his truck up to the house. He was going to winch the bars straight out of the wall. Clara had less than 2 minutes. She rushed back to the kitchen table, feeling in the dark for the oiled leather bundle. Her fingers brushed the brittle blueprints. The Caldwell vein. Excavation plan. She ran her thumb over the schematic, her eyes straining in the dim flashes of lightning. The diagram showed the back pantry, but the lines didn't stop at the hollowed-out alcove where she found the box. The ink lines continued downward, sketching a steep, narrow shaft leading directly beneath the mountain's bedrock. Clara sprinted to the loft ladder. "Sam, come down here right now." "Hurry." Sam scurried down the wooden rungs in his pajamas, crying silently. Clara scooped him up with her free arm, feeling the terrifyingly fragile weight of her child. She rushed them both into the ruined, flooded pantry. Outside, she heard the harsh, metallic clanking of a heavy-duty tow chain being wrapped around the window bars. The truck engine revved a monstrous mechanical scream. Clara dropped to her knees in the dark pantry, feeling the floorboards inside the newly revealed stone alcove. The wood was damp and swollen. She frantically ran her hands along the edges until her fingers caught on a rusted iron ring set flush into the floor. It wasn't just an alcove. It was a trap door. She gripped the ring with both hands, planting her boots on the stone, and pulled with everything she had. The muscles in her back screamed in agony. For a second, it didn't give. Screech! In the kitchen behind her, the iron window bars began to bend as Mitchell's truck surged forward. The stone foundation of the cabin cracked a sound like a gunshot. Driven by pure maternal adrenaline, Clara let out a visceral yell and yanked the iron ring upward. With a groan of ancient rusted hinges, the heavy wooden trapdoor tore free from its frame, revealing a pitch-black, narrow shaft lined with decaying wooden beams. A wave of freezing, stale air hit her face. "Hold on to my neck, Sam." "Do not let go," Clara ordered, her voice completely devoid of panic now. It was survival. She grabbed a small emergency flashlight from her pocket, clicked it on, and lowered herself into the black void. Her boots found a steep, carved stone staircase. As soon as she and Sam were below the floor line, she reached up and grabbed the iron ring, pulling the heavy trap door shut above them. 10 seconds later, an ear-splitting crash echoed from above. Mitchell had ripped the entire window frame bar's glass and a section of the wall straight out of the cabin. Clara stood frozen in the suffocating darkness of the tunnel, holding her breath, listening to the heavy thud of Mitchell's boots pacing the kitchen floor above them, screaming her name. The tunnel was a claustrophobic nightmare. Clara kept the flashlight beam pointed at her boots, moving slowly down the steep, jagged incline. The air smelled of wet earth and copper. It was clear that Tommy Caldwell hadn't just found a natural cave. He had systematically excavated this shaft, outfitting it with heavy timber supports. As they descended deeper into the mountain, the muffled sounds of the thunderstorm and Mitchell's rampage above completely faded away. They were entombed in absolute silence, save for the dripping of groundwater and Sam's rapid breathing. The depth. They walked for what felt like an hour, the path winding steadily downward. The discovery. Along the way, Clara's flashlight illuminated the truth of Tommy's legacy. Stacked in rotting wooden crates were Prohibition-era whiskey bottles, rusted Tommy guns, and mouldering sacks of what used to be cash, long since destroyed by the damp air. Beatrice hadn't just been hoarding junk. She had spent her entire adult life sitting on top of an underground fortress, guarding the spoils of a notorious 1930s crime syndicate to protect her family from the consequences. "Mummy, I'm cold." Sam whimpered, burying his face in her shoulder. "I know, baby. We're almost there." "I promise," Clara said, praying it wasn't a lie. Finally, the tunnel leveled out. The air grew perceptibly fresher, carrying the faint, metallic scent of pine needles and rain. Ahead, the flashlight beam caught the reflection of a massive rusted iron grate blocking a jagged opening in the rock. Clara set Sam down and inspected the grate. It was heavily padlocked, but the iron hinges were eaten through with 80 years of rust. Clara backed up, raised her heavy leather boot, and kicked the hinge with all her might. The ancient metal snapped like a dry twig. The grate swung outward, dumping them into the wet, freezing brush of the mountainside. They had emerged on the opposite side of Roan Mountain, a full 2 miles from the cabin. Through the dense trees, Clara saw the flashing red and blue lights of a North Carolina State Highway patrol cruiser, idling on the shoulder of Route 19. A rock slide from the storm had partially blocked the road, and the trooper was setting up flares. Clara didn't hesitate. Gripping Sam's hand and clutching the backpack of gold, she scrambled down the muddy embankment, waving her flashlight wildly. "Help, please help us!" she screamed. The trooper, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Sergeant Miller spun around his hand, instinctively dropping to his radio. When he saw the soaking wet, bruised mother and her shivering child emerging from the wilderness, he rushed forward. Within an hour, Clara and Sam were wrapped in thermal blankets in the back of an ambulance at the local precinct. Clara had made a split-second, life-altering decision. When the local police asked what happened, she told them everything about Mitchell's attack. But she did not tell the local police about the gold. Instead, she demanded to speak directly to the FBI field office in Charlotte, citing evidence of a historic federal bank robbery. By dawn, the precinct was swarming with federal agents. When Clara unzipped her canvas backpack and placed a perfectly preserved $1,934,000 bill and a solid gold bar on the interrogation table, the room went completely silent. The ensuing investigation was a media circus. Mitchell's downfall. Mitchell Caldwell was arrested at the cabin at 3 a.m. He had spent hours frantically tearing up the floorboards with his bare hands, trying to find the trapdoor. He was charged with attempted murder, breaking and entering, and assault. The Federal Reserve connection. The FBI confirmed that the gold and the cash matched the exact missing inventory from the infamous 1934 Chicago Federal Reserve heist, a crime orchestrated by a man known only to the feds as the Ghost. Now officially identified as Arthur Tommy Caldwell. The inheritance. Because Clara had turned the stolen federal property over to the authorities willingly, and because the statute of limitations on the crime had expired decades ago, a massive legal battle ensued. Clara didn't fight it alone. A prominent civil forfeiture defense attorney took her case pro bono, captivated by the story. 6 months later, a federal judge made a historic ruling. While the 1934 currency was repatriated to the federal government, Clara was awarded a staggering 10% finder's fee under a rare historical recovery act. Furthermore, the raw gold bullion, which lacked federal serial numbers, was ruled to be part of the physical estate left to her by Beatrice Caldwell. Clara walked out of the federal courthouse holding a cashier's check for $2.4 million and the legal rights to 4 gold bars worth roughly $3 million more. She wasn't homeless anymore. 1 year later, Clara and Sam stood on the wraparound porch of their new home, a beautiful sunlit farmhouse on a sprawling, peaceful plot of land in the Asheville Valley. Sam was laughing, chasing a golden retriever puppy across the freshly cut grass. Clara leaned against the wooden railing, sipping a mug of hot coffee. She wore a simple, elegant sweater, the dark circles under her eyes long gone, replaced by a quiet, fierce strength. She looked up toward the distant hazy peak of Roan Mountain. She thought about her grandmother Beatrice, a woman who had lived a life of terrifying paranoia, sleeping on a mattress of millions, terrified of the ghosts of the past. Beatrice had sacrificed her own peace so that one day her family might finally have theirs. Clara took a deep breath of the crisp morning air, holding her coffee tight. She had survived the mountain. She had survived the greed. And for the first time in her life, she was finally home. If Clara's incredible journey from a freezing car to unearthing a multi-million-dollar mountain of dangerous family secrets kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Don't forget to share this story with anyone who loves a true crime plot twist and subscribe to the channel for more unbelievable real-life mysteries. What would you have done if you found that lockbox? Let us know in the comments below.